after a 6-2 convincing win over Tampa and clinging on to a playoff spot, maybe as the Bruins, you think, hey, we could use one more guy here. We could use one more alpha here, and we're off to the races. And that's where Vancouver comes in again. Elias Pettersson, JT Miller. I've already done my spiel on Elias Pettersson. If you want to see it, I'll put it in the description. I love Elias Pettersson. I have since the day he entered the league. Notably, I have not gotten his jersey because I don't like the Canucks at all. But I love this kid. I think he's a tremendous, tremendous two-way forward. Awesome playmaker, bullet of a shot. And I know he's not having the greatest year of his career this year, but there's still so much upside with that kid at 26. He's entering his prime right now. That's going to be a tough one for the Bruins to pull off. But I don't see any excuse as to why you don't try. Like, to me, Pettersson can be a top 10 player in the league. I really think so. A top 10 forward in the league anyway. And he's entering into his prime. It's a big cap hit. What is it, like 11.5 on the cap hit? It's pretty big, but still 11.6. Yep, 11.6. But if that opportunity is there, I don't mind wasting whatever little draft capital you have left and whatever little prospect pool you have left to bring in someone like Elias Pettersson. I think he's that good a player personally, and I think you can work around that. The other Vancouver Canuck that's on the block is JT Miller. And of course, this comes from the beef between Pettersson and Miller. Apparently much more so than the made-up beef between Brad Marchand and David Pastrnak for the Bruins. This is real enough that Vancouver is taking calls on both of them. And weirdly, almost kind of starting over, it feels like, if they get rid of both of them. Which I would think would be a mistake. But anyway, that's not for me to say. So Elias Pettersson, while he is the better of the two, in my opinion, and certainly the one you would rather have, it's probably a tough move for the Bruins to make. So then let's look at JT Miller, a guy who is at the forefront of this beef because he's had beef with other teammates before. And there is a cautionary tale that comes with JT Miller. But when you look at the numbers, it's tough not to pick up that phone if you're Don Sweeney. This guy was a 100-point guy last year, okay? And he is a number one center. That's what's so crazy about Vancouver. They have 2 number one centers. And if you ask Don Sweeney, last year they had 3 number one centers because they had Elias Lindholm too. If you asked anyone else in the league, they would say, no, they only have 2 number one centers. But if you asked Don Sweeney, he would tell you, no, they've got 3. This Elias Lindholm guy is our center number one. Wrong, mistake, incorrect. And now you're shopping for another Canucks center, which is kind of funny. But JT Miller absolutely is that number one guy. 100 points last year. Not too shabby in the other years as well in Vancouver, where his game is really kind of taken it up to the next level. 103 points last year, 82 the year before, 99 the year before that. He was a minus player in 22-23, a minus player this year. And he's got 29 points in 32 games. So not quite on the 100 points pace, right? More closer to the 80-point pace. But if you look at the Bruins, there's one guy on the roster who's going to hit 80 points this year, maybe. Pastrnak probably hits it. I think he's at 48 through 46 games. He's going to hit that. But if you're looking at this and saying, well, if I can't get Elias Pettersson, I don't want to get JT Miller. The fact is, you don't have anyone close to JT Miller. At the center position, no way. And really only have one forward close to that production. It's David Pastrnak. That's it. And imagine the production you would get if you had someone who could provide for David Pastrnak, because that's the whole point of this here. And, I mean, Miller's still, close to a power forward as you're going to get in the league these days. He gets Selke votes often, not at the top of it, not finishing in the top 10. But he did finish in the top 15 last year and got Hart Trophy votes last year and has gotten those votes 3 times in his time in Vancouver, which dates back to 2019. He's older than Pettersson, obviously. Pettersson at 26, JT Miller at 32 or turning 32 this season. That's where you got to be wary of. And I think he's signed through 2029, 2030 maybe. So he's going up to age 36, 37 on that deal. Those back few years, those back nine, so to speak, will be tough. But it certainly looks like JT Miller is a guy who can produce for this year and the next couple years versus what we've seen this year and the last few years. It doesn't look like he's really slowing down anytime soon. I think you would have to wonder about what the production is going to be like when he doesn't have some of the wingers that Vancouver has. You know, he doesn't have Horvat or Brock Besser or some of these guys he's played with in the past and gotten him to 100 points. But with Pastrnak out there, I think that's going to help a lot because as good as those guys are, they're not David Pastrnak in terms of goal scoring. So if Pastrnak gets hurt or JT Miller goes to another line, then you got an issue. In terms of the actual trade, this is where it becomes easier for the Bruins because it's a much different salary to match. $8 million is not chump change, but it's not 11.6 like Pettersson. And when you're up against the cap like the Bruins are, and I believe the Canucks are as well, you've got to match that. So that's where these names come in, like Hampus Lindholm, Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle. I think Lindholm is like 6.5. Zacha is about 4.5. Coyle's 5.5 per year. Frederick's a little bit less, but he's going to be a free agent. Like if you're asking me and most Bruins fans, and I would say most GMs around the league, like send them away tomorrow if that's what it's going to cost. And it will cost something like a draft pick and maybe a Matt Patra. But as I said about Pettersson with Patra, Patra's a good player. I like him. I think he's going to be a decent player in this league. I really do. Middle six center, sure. JT Miller's a number one center. He's been an 80-point guy basically the last 4 or 5 seasons with Vancouver as his game has turned up. And I don't know when Matt Patra is going to be an 80-point guy, if he's going to be an 80-point guy. That's probably a stretch. Okay, JT Miller already is one. So it's going to cost some capital in terms of either a high round draft pick or a Matt Patra type. And then some of these guys, some of these expendable middle 6 to bottom 6 guys on your roster. And the other thing I really like about JT Miller is he wins faceoffs. He wins 58% of his faceoffs, which is better than anyone on the Bruins right now. I think it's one of their biggest issues. They don't win faceoffs. Now, there are some guys that are close. In fact, the closest is Johnny Beecher, who's not taking a lot of faceoffs. Elias Lindholm, your number one center, is 5 percentage points behind him. That's a lot. That's a lot behind. Charlie Coyle wins 50% of his faceoffs. That's probably your next guy out there. So if nothing else, JT Miller is by far the best faceoff guy of your like top end centers, of guys who should be taking a lot of faceoffs. So he fixes a lot of things for the Bruins. You want to have that oomph that Cam Neely and Don Sweeney love. Okay, here's a guy who can bring you that and actually score points, actually produce offense for you. Unlike Elias Lindholm, who doesn't really give you either of those things. Nikita Zadorov doesn't obviously give you offense, but I'm going to give Zadorov some credit. He's been excellent for them the last month or so. Still takes some stupid penalties, but he's a plus player for this team right now. That's way minus in the goal differential as a team. Nikita Zadorov, his skating has been better. He's clearing out the net a little bit better than he was, and he's a plus player. So there you go. You didn't. I wouldn't say you hit on that deal yet, but you're at least getting something of what you bargained for. JT Miller, that's the kind of player you were targeting in the offseason. You just got a worse version, a way worse version than Elias Lindholm. So yeah, if it's up to me, I'm Pettersson all day long. I don't care that he doesn't check. I really couldn't give a shit less. He does everything well. Everything. Offensive zone, defensive zone, face-offs, passing, shot. He's an incredible player. And this is not a downfall for him. This is a pause in production, I would say. But if you're going to go and say JT Miller's the guy from a on-ice standpoint, okay, that's something the Bruins could really use. I think the off-ice thing does need to be addressed. Like, there's been some issues with JT Miller, minor issues everywhere he's been, but specifically in Vancouver. it's not just Elias Pettersson that he's had a run-in with. He's had a couple of teammates. In fact, some of his teammates have gone on podcasts and been like, yeah, I love JT, but we had to tell him to take it easy on these kids. Like, he was freaking out. He's screaming at his goalie when he's not emptying the net at the right time. And like, it's there. JT Miller seems to be the constant here. And I think if you ask Vancouver which one they would rather trade, it's going to be JT Miller in a second. So maybe that helps in terms of the return and what you have to send to Vancouver. Maybe that you could back him into a corner a little bit. But the Bruins are also not going to be the only team after him. The Rangers are going to want a reunion. They need all the same things the Bruins need. And Chicago, I think, is going to be a team that's really pushing for him. Like, they've been looking for veteran guys, savvy guys who have been there and done that to help with this Connor Bedard development. And here's a guy who actually produces. He's obviously not going to play on a line with Bedard because Bedard's a center. But here's a guy who can make the second line much better for Chicago and take some of the stress off Connor Bedard, at least on an on-ice sense. But also, if we're talking about the way he works with young players, maybe that's not the best thing for a 19-year-old, 20-year-old Connor Bedard. Anyway, I would be stunned if the Bruins don't make a push for either one of these two guys. Obviously, it doesn't mean anything if you don't bring them in the door. But from an on-ice standpoint, I'd be fine with JT Miller. Better than any center you got right now. I think better than a long shot from any center that you've got right now. Again, he's on a 80-point pace here. Elias Lindholm is on basically a 40-point pace. That's your number one center. So let's not overthink this. Let's just look at that. Oh, and by the way, 16 power play points this year. David Pastrnak is the Bruins leader in power play points with 10. It's where they struggle the most. And he brings the things that you struggle at the most, the face-offs, production, offensive production from your center, production on the power play. JT Miller blows everyone away on the Bruins roster right now. So as much as I want Pettersson, JT Miller, while the poor man's Elias Pettersson in this scenario and a lot older, is much better than anything the Bruins have at any of those. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Should the Bruins make this kind of blockbuster trade? Should it be Pettersson? Should it be Miller? Do you have concerns about Miller? Please let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. Most of you watching are not subscribed. We want to change that because we're bringing you fresh Boston sports content every weekday. We're live on YouTube at high noon Eastern time, 11 a.m. Central. And then after that, wherever you get your podcast. So we'll see you tomorrow on The Cam Show.
We are Rogue Media Sports.